7. Experience a great atmosphere with great music at Crooner's Supper Club. Explore the shows at croonersmn.com. Stop by Maggie's Lounge before or after your show for cocktails and light fare. Open Wednesdays through Sundays at 4:30. No tickets needed. Again, that's Maggie's Lounge at Crooner's Supper Club. Portions of the following program may be pre-recorded. And you're listening to the Matt McNeil Show on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Also on WCPT 820 Heartland Signal Chicago and KKNW in Seattle. Welcome to the show today. As you can probably tell, Matt McNeil is not here. He is off for the week, so today you're stuck with me, Brett Johnson, one of the producers that you occasionally hear on Matt's show, as I'll be taking you through both hours today, as we have a lot coming your way, at least during this national hour that's going to be broadcast here in Minneapolis, Chicago, and Seattle. We are going to be later on joined by Matt Gertz of Media Matters, as we're going to be talking about the evolution of the Republican Party and their stance towards Russia and Vladimir Putin. Because if you really go back, even just a little over a decade ago, it's quite amazing to look back and see how much the Republican Party has changed in their approach to Russia. We'll be walking through that timeline entirely, coming up with Matt Gertz at about 3:35 or so. And you don't want to miss that. Going to be a fascinating conversation with him. But like I said, I am Brett Johnson, one of the producers here at AM 950, filling in today. Got Patrick Lilia on the other side of the glass. Patrick, how are things going with you over there today?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you today?
Hey, doing good. Been a while since I've done this, but always fun to step into the hosting chair. So if I end up like breaking the microphone or busting my headphones or maybe just overall having a panic attack in here, you'll be there to carry me through. At least I hope.
Oh, I will definitely do my best.
Absolutely. All right. Well, commercial breaks are always our friend if we run into that. No, I don't anticipate that happening. Always fun to fill in for Matt McNeil when he takes some time off. And just a reminder, he is off entirely this week. You got me today. We'll have Bruce Klopfleisch of Politics Matters filling in tomorrow. Then we got on Thursday, Philip Anthony of the Downright Upright Show. Then we're back to the legendary Nancy Nelson filling in on Friday before Matt McNeil is back next Monday. And by the way, we have a special announcement coming up about Matt McNeil's 15-year anniversary here at AM 950. In fact, we have a big anniversary celebration coming up at some point in the future. Can't share a lot of details yet, but we should be able to give you a whole lot more information in the coming days. So make sure you stay tuned for that, because you won't want to miss Matt's 15-year anniversary celebration. Well, it's time now to get into the news of the day, and one of the people I decided to invite on the show has to be easily one of the most busy people in Washington, D.C. Well, no, he's not actually a congressperson, but he has been very, very busy over the past few weeks, and once I give you his name and his title and the organization he works for, you'll probably understand why. Today, we're going to be speaking with Max Richmond. He is the president and the CEO of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, also NCPSSM. Find them over at ncpssm.org. And my goodness, if there was ever a time to have the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare be more relevant than now, I can't think of one. So we have a lot to talk about today, including the DOGE attacks on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We'll go through some of the myths that we often hear from Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and maybe some hope for the future for what we can do to make sure Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid stay sustainable for the foreseeable future. So very happy to welcome Max Richmond back to the show. Max, thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely. So I first up got to ask, is this about the biggest / most threatening attack you've seen on our social safety net programs, at least in your tenure with the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare?
You know, it's interesting. I was listening to your introduction. You were talking about how the Republican Party has changed, evolved over the last 10 years with respect to relationships we have with Russia. And I was thinking about that and thinking about how it applied to our big issue, which is in the media so much lately, Social Security. And to answer your question, if 20 years ago the Republican Party was committed to privatizing Social Security, right? George Bush, after he was reelected, I'll never forget this, in 2004, we were in our conference room. I wasn't the president of the organization at that time, but I was with the organization. We were watching President Bush speak the day after he was reelected, and he said, "I have earned political capital in this campaign, and I'm going to use it to privatize Social Security." And that was the first thing he said. So it was, is this the most direct, overwhelming assault on Social Security? It's a different kind of assault. At that point, back then, it was above board. It was, the president said, "This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to privatize it." There was an awful lot of discussion about cutting benefits, cutting the COLA, changing the formula for what the COLA, what the benefits should be, raising the retirement age. This is a little different. As President Trump has said repeatedly, even in the last few days, "I am not going to touch Social Security." That's what he says. But we're looking at what is going on. We're looking at all of the reductions in the Social Security office, the staffing of Social Security, and all of the myths. You're out I grew up in Nebraska, so I know how polite you are in Minnesota. So I won't call them lies, but they're close to lies about Social Security. And some of those we heard at the State of the Union were about as bad as any I've heard over the years. And what these lies about Social Security, or myths about Social Security, all have in common, including the ones we heard at the State of the Union, they are designed to undermine the faith and the support that people around the country, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, 80% plus, all political parties support Social Security. So if you want to undermine the program, you've got to start perpetuating these lies, these myths, like we heard in the State of the Union, the implication that people that are 150, 200, 300 years old are getting Social Security. That's not true. We know that's not true. But people will begin to wonder if their success in spreading these myths, people will begin to wonder about the stability of the program and the faith they have in the program that's going to be 90 years old this August will start to dissipate. So that's that's the difference. Back in 20 years ago with then President Bush, it was very direct, it was very obvious, it was above board. Now it's a little more nefarious.
And I think as I even look at that Elon Musk interview that he did earlier this week with Fox Business Network, where he pretty much said, well, this is the direct quote, "Most of the federal spending is entitlements, and that's the big one to eliminate," which to me is surprising, given what you said with Donald Trump saying, "I'm not going to cut Social Security, I'm not going to cut Medicare." And then we have Elon Musk, who of course is the person that's been completely empowered by Donald Trump, and he really let the cat out of the bag and said something that I think a lot of politicians want to say. It's the big one.
Yeah. It may, is this a good cop, bad cop arrangement they have made? Kind of looks like it. It is very obvious. And just look at the cabinet meeting and the president having Elon Musk holding forth. He has empowered him, and the person that he's empowered calls Social Security a Ponzi scheme. Donald Trump in the past has called it a huge scam, a scam. So if this is the way you look at this program and you try to listen to the public support for the program and promise you won't cut it, those things don't add up. So what it means is if you care about these programs, if you care about Social Security, you got to be worried because it's hard to reconcile the man's been empowered to rein in the government, calling the Social Security a Ponzi scheme, and very clearly in the interview you just referenced saying, basically, this is where the money is, right? This is where the money is. So this is where we've got to go to rob this bank, where the money is. And should people be worried? Absolutely. Should they be worried that offices around the country are being closed, staff is being cut, people are being encouraged to take a buyout, and these are people that have been there a long time and know how to service the public. One thing that a lot of people overlook is the funding for this program. Almost all of it comes out of the payroll tax. It's not just the benefits that are paid, but to beneficiaries, but the money that's used to run the program, to hire the staff, to pay for the experts, to pay for the service that people expect when they have deductions, FICA deductions from their checks. They're paying for service as well as for benefits in the future. So that is going to be denied. And the former commissioner, O'Malley, he said at a press conference that I appeared at and spoke last week of House Ways and Means Democrats, is we could be looking at benefit checks not being sent on time in the next 30 to 90 days. Now, when you hear that from someone who's committed to the Social Security program, served as a commissioner of it, tried to improve it, people will start to wonder whether they can count on Social Security. And maybe what that results in is what 20 years ago, then President Bush was supporting, and that was privatizing Social Security, because that will be the alternative. And so when I say back then it was obvious, above board, it was direct, this is what I'm planning to do. Now it's much harder to pin down, and that's why groups like the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare really have got to focus, be vigilant, pay attention.
Our time is already flying by. We are speaking with Max Richmond, President and CEO of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. We got to take a quick break, but on the other side, I want to talk about some of these staff cuts that we're seeing at the Social Security Administration, because as Max was already alluding to, this could have a big impact on your payments. So still lots more to get to. You're listening to the Matt McNeil Show. Brett Johnson filling in here on this Tuesday afternoon.
Hey, Twin Cities, ready to turn your side hustle into a main hustle? Struggling to grow your business or find the capital you need? We've got the solution. Join us for the Capital Readiness Summit, April 10 through 12 at the Wilder Foundation in St. Paul. This two-day event is packed with hands-on workshops and powerful networking opportunities. Meet local investors, connect with national resources, and build relationships that could take you years to find on your own. This is your chance to level up your business and join the thriving small business ecosystem. But don't wait, this event sells out every year. Act now. Grab your ticket today at www.connectupmn.org. Flexible payment options are available. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn for the latest updates and discount codes. Don't miss the Capital Readiness Summit. Your next big move starts here.
Connections Radio Show is all about tapping into our hardwired hunger to connect. We examine meaningful connections to ourselves, our community, and the world around us. By opening the door to innovative insights by a wide variety of interesting guests, we'll make the connections to something bigger than ourselves. Join me, Lori Fitz, your host of Connections Radio Show, and together we'll make the connections. Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
You may not think of it, but winter is a great time to take care of those exterior home projects. This is Chad, owner of AM 950 for Snap Construction. Most people wait until the warmer months for their exterior home projects, but labor costs are actually lowest in the winter. And that's true for the contractor I trust, Snap Construction, arguably the most well-reviewed exterior contractor and insulation contractor in the metro. Are you noticing ice dams on your house, or is your furnace constantly running and you're still not comfortable? In addition to your exterior home projects, winter is also a great time to get your insulation checked with a free energy audit from Snap Construction. The average cost to upgrade your insulation is oftentimes less than a new furnace. Plus, there are rebates available from your energy provider when you upgrade your insulation. As always, Snap Construction stands by their work with a lifetime craftsmanship warranty. So don't wait for prices to rise in the warmer months. Get a free estimate now by calling 612-333-SNAP, 612-333-SNAP, or go to snapconstruction.com.
Hello, I'm Todd Mickelson, host of a Satellite View podcast. It's hard to find clarity or focus here on the ground with the fire hose of issues and events. We go up high and look back on Earth from a satellite view, where we can gain our bearings and learn from the past to shoot for a better future. And have fun and laughs along the way. Go to am950radio.com, click the programs link, and find a satellite view with Todd Mickelson.
You're listening to the Matt McNeil Show on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, also on WCPT 820, Heartland Signal Chicago, and Seattle's KKNW 1150. Glad to have you with us here on this Tuesday afternoon. As you can probably tell, it is not Matt McNeil, it's Brett Johnson filling in for Matt. And I want to get back to our conversation that we've been having with Max Richmond, the president and CEO of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. I feel like we could talk just about the entire hour, but unfortunately, we only got about one more 8-minute segment left. And I want to switch gears now. And you were alluding to this, Max, talking about the cuts to the Social Security Administration and at least the people who service what's happening with Social Security and the workers who work for that administration, because oftentimes when we think of their funding, we just think about, well, what are the raw funds that are being paid to you and me or other people who are on Social Security? And we don't actually think about the people who are trying to service and make sure you're eligible for your benefits and making sure they get distributed. So let's talk about what would happen, or at least what would happen if we had proper funding for the Social Security Administration? Because even before we had Donald Trump and Elon Musk come into power, the SSA was already severely underfunded, and it's only going to probably get worse if their cuts go through. But what would things look like if we actually did have a properly funded agency?
Well, you make such a good point. And let me just repeat what I said in the first segment. The funding for the administration of the Social Security predominantly comes from the payroll tax. It's not just the benefits that people receive every month who are beneficiaries. It's the actual operation of the program, the administration of it. Almost all of that comes out of the payroll tax. It's important that people keep that in mind, because when you are working and you're paying Social Security FICA tax, you are also paying for your service to have the program run properly. That's number one. The Social Security, as you pointed out, is already being staffed at a 50-year low. There aren't enough people now to provide the kind of service people have earned by paying their payroll tax. And now we have this new regime, Musk, Doge, Trump, the acting commissioner, have announced plans to cut at least 7,000 jobs at an agency that is already experiencing this 50-year low. This is at a time when about 10,000 people, 10,000, become Social Security beneficiaries every day, not every week or month, every day. So 10,000 more people roughly on average are added to the Social Security rolls every day. And we're going to, under this administration, this plan, cut 7,000 jobs. What you asked what it will mean. Ask somebody who's already tried to get information to correct a problem. Go to Social Security, how long it takes to talk to someone, to get in the door, to have a meeting. Ask them how long it's already taken. It is outrageous. Ask somebody who has tried to call the 800 number, which was a great innovation, and we applauded it, but it was very hard to get through. You had to be on the phone for a long time. I, a number of years ago, testified at a congressional committee about the 800 number, and I dialed it before I began speaking on the panel I was on at the hearing, and 45 minutes later, it was my turn to make my presentation. I was still on hold. I was trying to make a point.
Wow.
That whole time is going to get even longer. It's going to take longer to get someone on the phone that can fix a problem, that can answer a question, that can correct a mistake in someone's work history, someone's record. So all this is happening at the same time. This the regime, I call them the new regime, is trying to push long-time Social Security workers out the door. These are the ones that have decades experience, trying to push them into early retirement. Field offices are being closed around the country. Again, making it harder for beneficiaries to get in-person help or to have to drive much farther, if they can drive, to get some customer service. This is part of Social Security's job. It's to pay beneficiaries what they've earned, but it's to pay for Social Security services that are provided through the payroll tax, predominantly through the payroll tax. This regime is crippling. They're determined, it seems, to cripple the agency workers that workers paid for in their payroll tax. So, if you had, my example, if you had to wait 45 minutes to talk to someone, if you call the 800 number, you're going to have to wait longer. It's going to be harder to get in-person help at field offices. And so many people, thousands, have died waiting for a Social Security disability hearing on an appeal that they have made. Before that is resolved, they die. We know that. We know what the numbers are. It's outrageous. It's just going to get worse. So, why is all this happening? If the president really cared about Social Security, he would do more than keep saying, "I'm not going to touch it." That doesn't mean anything. When you look behind the words and look at the actions, look at the plans, all of these things that I've been talking about are designed to undermine this program. And if that succeeds, if that goal is met, all of the support that we have in this country for this program will start to dissipate. I have met so many people when they find out what I do, when I meet people socially, almost to a person, I'm for that. I'm for Social Security. So the only way you can achieve these kinds of changes, cripple this agency, is by undermining the faith and the support that people have. And all of these actions are designed to do that. Cutting staff, cutting the budget, making it harder for people to get the service that they have earned while they were working. That is the goal. And I want to just say there have been myths about Social Security for decades that are wrong. They're lies. That it's the money's not. There's no money there. That's not true. That the money was stolen. That's not true. That it's an entitlement. It's not an entitlement. It's an earned benefit. And this, what we heard on the State of the Union or the joint address to Congress last week, just adds to that pile of myths, that pile of lies that have one thing in common, and that is to undermine the support that exists in this country for Social Security and has for 90 years.
Max,
Social Security will be 90 years old August 14th.
I hate to cut you off, but we are coming up on a hard break. Max Richmond, CEO of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Learn more about that, ncpssm.org. Stay tuned. We got Matt Gertz of Media Matters up next.
Come see the trained chimp. It's the Matt McNeil Show, 3 to 5 p.m. weekday afternoons, right here on AM 950 KTNF, St. Louis Park, Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Is your remote workforce putting your company at risk? Cyber criminals are targeting your employees with COVID-19 inspired emails and attacking businesses like yours. Hi, Mark Sommerfeld from Rymark. Rymark has the tools and expertise to enable your employees to work securely from home. If you need help getting your staff to work remotely and securely, call 651-328-8900 or go to rymarkit.com. That's 651-328-8900 or rymarkit.com.
Greg Bakken here. Like you, I love good, fresh, delicious food. So I want to tell you about this treasure in Roseville called Maverick's Real Roast Beef. Maverick's has the best roast beef sandwiches I've ever had. Made fresh every order. Add fries or onion rings dropped in the fryer when ordered, and you have a winning combination. Maverick's Real Roast Beef has a lot more than roast beef, so check out their website, mavericksbeef.com, or check out their restaurant on Lexington in Roseville.
Hey, it's Patrick. We're headed into March, which means spring cleaning is almost here. You're about to realize that, and so is just about everybody else, too. That's why you need to beat the spring cleaning rush with big savings and priority booking by calling our friends at Zero Res right now. We just had Zero Res over at our house last week, and they did such a wonderful job. They were on time, professional, and we couldn't be happier with the results. Spring is a time for renewal. Let Zero Res help you refresh your home with clean carpets, fresh floors, and improved air quality. This month, get 3 rooms Zero Resified from Minnesota's #1 carpet cleaner starting at $129 and take $75 off an air duct cleaning. Again, that's 3 rooms starting at $129 and $75 off an air duct cleaning. Beat the rush. Call now 952-0RES or go to ZeroResMinnesota.com and ask for the AM 950 special. That's Zero Res. Backward or forward spells the same.
You want to feel important? You want to be part of something bigger, something that matters, and that you can help change things. You want to feel like you belong. We felt that way too. I'm Sergeant First Class Daphne Pierre from Robbinsdale, Minnesota, and that's why we did something about it. We aren't just Minnesota Army National Guard soldiers. We are people just like you, and together, we can make a difference. Take on your legacy. Visit nationalguard.com/MN to find out more. Sponsored by the Minnesota Army National Guard, aired by the Minnesota Broadcasters Association and this station.
With your AM 950 weather, I'm Brett Johnson. Look for sunny skies today with a high near 43, tonight cloudy with a low around 31, and Wednesday sunny with a high around 57. Experience a great atmosphere with great music at Crooners Supper Club. Explore the shows at croonersmn.com. Stop by Maggie's Lounge before or after your show for cocktails and light fare. Open Wednesdays through Sundays at 4:30. No tickets needed. Again, that's Maggie's Lounge at Crooners Supper Club. You're listening to AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. And you're listening to the Matt McNeil Show on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, as well as WCPT 820 Chicago Heartland Signal and 1150 AM KKNW Seattle. This is Brett Johnson filling in for Matt McNeil, who is off this week. So up next, we're going to be talking about Trump and Russia and at least the history of how the Republican Party has evolved significantly over the past decade on their stances toward Vladimir Putin and Russia. Because over the past decade, right-wing media has undergone a dramatic shift in its stance to Russia and Vladimir Putin, moving from Cold War-era hostility to openly amplifying Kremlin propaganda. And that's a striking reversal from back in 2012. Do you remember this? When Mitt Romney called Russia our #1 geopolitical foe during a presidential debate with Barack Obama. Now, at the time, Barack Obama and others in the media dismissed the claim as outdated Cold War thinking. But in the years since, and especially following Russia's interference in the 2016 election, the Republican Party's attitude towards Moscow has shifted dramatically. Today, many on the right downplay Russian aggression, echo Kremlin talking points, and even portray Vladimir Putin as a defender of traditional values against the so-called liberal elite. So, how did this transformation happen, and what does it mean for the future of both political parties, that's Democrats and Republicans? Matt Gertz is a senior fellow at Media Matters, and he's been following this shift closely within the Republican Party. In his recent column titled The Right's Decade-Long Lurch Toward Vladimir Putin's Russia, he breaks down how conservative media figures have helped reshape the right's view of Russia. Matt, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so the moment that really jogged my memory as we talk about the Republicans evolving on how they cover Russia goes back to the 2012 election cycle, and at least for me specifically, a debate between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. Now, at this debate back in 2012, Mitt Romney made a point calling Russia a big threat to America and talking about how Vladimir Putin was a threat to democracy and how America needed to do more to counter Russia. Now, of course, he was somewhat mocked by the media at that point, and even Republicans were kind of even echoing his talking points. But things changed quite significantly over the past decade. What was the attitudes towards Russia back then? Before we start walking forward towards how things are now with Russia and the Republican Party, but let's zoom back to 2012. How were Republicans approaching Russia and Putin back then?
I would say they were more or less uniformly anti-Russia. The sort of carryover from the Cold War era of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush as the major presences in the Republican Party was still happening. And I think we saw around the time of the Romney comments that you're talking about, that was very much the kind of boilerplate position of the Republican Party and so of the right-wing media. Around then, you had the sort of Obama hot mic incident, as it was called at the time, in which President Obama told then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev that he would have more flexibility to negotiate on nuclear weapons and other issues after the November election. And this was seen by many on the right as setting up some sort of major betrayal of the country, more or less. This was a period in which the right had become really feverishly anti-Obama to almost comical extent. And so they, used that line that got picked up by a hot mic against him. And it was a useful way to try to undermine his political standing. And that was, we're talking about everyone from the sort of upper crust Wall Street Journal editorial board types to the kind of bottom feeders at Breitbart and Gateway Pundit, all kind of reading from the same hymnal at the time.
Well, talking about some other moments where things really began to change. And again, we are speaking with Matt Gertz. He is a senior fellow at Media Matters about his column, The Right's Decade-Long Lurch Toward Vladimir Putin's Russia. Find that over at MediaMatters.org. Again, talking about some of those moments where the stance of the Republicans began to change on Russia. I think one of those big moments, as you wrote about, was during the summer of 2013, where Putin banned the dissemination of what he called gay propaganda and prohibited same-sex couples in Russia and foreigners from nations with marriage equality from adopting Russian children. Meanwhile, at this time, we had the Obama-Biden administration who came out in support of same-sex marriage, really to draw that contrast. And to me, this really seemed to be that big moment of the right wing embracing Putin. Let's talk about how central this was, at least culturally, in shifting right-wing attitudes towards being more friendly with Russia.
I think of it as kind of a precursor moment. I started looking back at how the right had shifted on Russia in light of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance sort of ambushing Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House. And, that made me want to figure out where had this shift occurred. I figured that most of it would be related to Donald Trump, but in fact, you had this kind of precursor period where a faction of the right just decided that they really liked that Vladimir Putin hated gay people, that the fact that he was being criticized in the summer of 2013 by many, both in the EU and in the United States, including Obama, for the laws that he was trying to pass. They looked at that as, both an opportunity and, frankly, as a preferred manner of politics. Pat Buchanan, who in many ways is kind of a proto-Trump figure, wrote at that time, our moral and cultural elites have put Putin on notice. Get in step with us on homosexual rights or we may just boycott your Sochi games. What this reveals is the distance America has traveled morally and culturally in a few short years and our amnesia about who we Americans once were and what it is we once believed. He wrote later that year that Putin's opposition to marriage equality made him, quote, one of us in the culture war for mankind's future. So this was sort of an early stage of this shift towards Russia in which a faction of the right-wing media, by no means the majority of it, but still some prominent figures, began looking at what Vladimir Putin was doing in Russia, what we would consider, horrific assaults on civil liberties, and saying, you know what, that's great, and it's a shame that we're not doing it here in the United States.
As we talk more about those figures, at least back then and certainly now, right-wing figures that embraced Vladimir Putin, whether it's Pat Buchanan, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, or more, they all framed Vladimir Putin as kind of being this moral leader in the world. Do you think the messaging with them was strategic, or was there a genuine belief among those guys that Vladimir Putin really is a moral leader? I know it's tough to kind of get in the head of Pat Buchanan, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity et al., but what do you think of that idea? Do they genuinely believe Vladimir Putin is this moral leader, or is this more kind of transactional or strategic on their parts?
So I think there was kind of a split here. I think as far as the, people like Pat Buchanan who are praising Putin's gay rights stance, I think that was very genuine. I think that they actually preferred Vladimir Putin's stance on the issues to those of Barack Obama. Then there's a sort of second set of people on the right who are emerging at this time. And the argument that they're making, I think, is more trollish. They're basically saying, well, say what you will about Vladimir Putin, but he's a real leader. Barack Obama dithers, he doesn't make decisions quickly, whereas Vladimir Putin, what his stance is. Now, of course, he's a vicious dictator who murders his political enemies and journalists who criticize him. And so, I think that was somewhat less genuine when people say things like, can we get Putin in for 48 hours, head of the United States, as Kimberly Guilfoyle did back in August 2014. I don't think that was something that she necessarily believed, but it fit in with the caricature that people on the right had been painting of Obama for years. It was something much more, I think, based on their hatred of Obama rather than necessarily their love for Putin.
And now fast forwarding a bit towards Donald Trump's first presidential campaign, let's talk about how he was oftentimes openly praising Vladimir Putin during the campaign. And in fact, as many people infamously remember, him asking Russian authorities to investigate Hillary Clinton's emails. How did right-wing media initially react to Donald Trump's embrace of Vladimir Putin back then? And what changed as he became the GOP frontrunner? Because I remember a lot of the Republican coverage of him began to change on his stance with Russia as he became more and more likely to be the actual Republican nominee back in 2016.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this basically followed a pattern that you saw on virtually every issue over the course of that 2016 campaign. Early earlier in the campaign, you would have prominent Republicans and right-wing media figures willing to say that Donald Trump is racist, that he's misogynist, that he is too crazy to be allowed to have access to nuclear weapons, and so on and so forth down the line. But as he became the front runner, as it became clear that a large portion of the GOP base either didn't care about those positions or in fact supported him because of those positions, you saw everyone more or less falling into line. And I think Russia as an issue emerged fairly late in the process. You had Paul Manafort emerging fairly late in 2016 as the campaign chair, who had deep ties to pro-Russian Ukrainian politicians. You had Trump saying on the stump, Russia, if you're listening, go get Hillary Clinton's emails, in July of 2016. So at this point, it's too late for Republicans to really make a change at the top of the ticket, or at least that's how they perceived things. And so they kind of just fell into line. You had most people on Fox basically playing it off as a joke, saying that the media is deliberately distorting what Trump said to make it sound worse, and so on and so forth. But Russia did not seem to take it as a joke around that time when Trump asked them to try to find the Hillary Clinton emails. You had Russian officials start targeting email addresses related to Hillary Clinton in order to do exactly what Trump wanted. There was a very deliberate effort happening at the time in which the Russian government was attempting to interfere with the U.S. elections in order to throw the election to Donald Trump. It was eventually effective, I would say. And it also set the right-wing media up for years of explaining away Trump's ties to Russia, his support from Russia, and all the different ways the two intersected.
All right, so in just a minute, we are coming up on a hard break, but we are going to continue our conversation with Matt Gertz of Media Matters, as we still have a few more topics to cover on this idea of how the Republican Party has evolved on their stance with Russia and Vladimir Putin. In the next segment, we'll talk about whether this Republican shift on Russia is going to be permanent, or if there's some hope on things possibly changing and the Republicans returning to sanity. Plus, we'll also talk about whether there are any dissenting voices on the right that are trying to at least counter this idea that the Republicans have so far embraced Russian propaganda and Vladimir Putin. So still lots more to get to. Again, we're speaking with Matt Gertz. He's a senior fellow at Media Matters. And make sure you check out his column. The title of it is The Right's Decade-Long Lurch Towards Vladimir Putin's Russia. Find that over at MediaMatters.org. That's MediaMatters.org. And make sure you give them a follow, as they do a great job covering right-wing media and how they oftentimes really distort the truth. Again, that's MediaMatters.org. Stay tuned. Part 2 of my conversation with Matt Gertz is coming up next on The Matt McNeil Show.
Everyone wants to maximize their dollar. If you're looking for a new vehicle, the only place to go is Rudy Luther Toyota. Consumer Reports Best of 2025 edition has the most reliable vehicles as Toyotas. The Toyota Corolla, RAV4, and RAV4 Prime top the list of the most reliable cars. And Toyotas are fuel efficient, meaning less money at the pumps. Consumer Reports Best of Gas Mileage ranking has the Prius Camry, Corolla Cross Hybrid, RAV4 Hybrid, and the Highlander Hybrid top of their classes. Reliability and fuel efficiency, you'll find them both at Rudy Luther Toyota, 5 miles west of Minneapolis on 394.
Located just north of 50th in France, the Great Wall Restaurant has provided a delicious taste of authentic Chinese cuisine since 1981. Specializing in Szechuan and Peking dishes, they offer one of the most extensive menus in the Twin Cities. Favorites include hot and sour soup, pan-fried dumplings, and mushu pork with homemade Chinese pancakes. Stop by their Edina location or call for takeout at 952-927-4439. See the full menu at greatwallrestaurant.us.
Coming up this Wednesday on The Daily Show, just weeks after MSNBC took a hatchet to their anchors of color, the network has made history in a good way with the newly named anchors for its show The Weekend. So join us on Wednesday live at 2 p.m. or stream us on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@TheGaileyShow. Follow us on Blue Sky for ticket giveaways and more progressive news and analysis. We're at thegaileyshow.org on Blue Sky.
Hey, it's Freddie Bell, host of New Beginnings, designed for those of us more seasoned, I'll say, with informative talk on everything from health, finance, local and regional news, volunteerism, spirituality, and even a bit of humor tossed in. So if you're proud to be a more seasoned listener, tune in to New Beginnings Sunday afternoons at 1 right here on the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, AM 950.
Join us April 10 through 12 at the Capital Readiness Summit, where we're bridging the gap between investors, support organizations, and the entrepreneur community. In just 2 days, you'll make connections that could take you years to build. With over 180 degrees of networking power, this is your chance to meet people you've been looking for. But hurry, the summit sells out every year. Register now at www.connectupmn.org. That's connectupmn.org. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for updates and discount codes. If you're an entrepreneur and investor, you don't want to miss this event of the year.
It's no secret that medical care costs are soaring, with nursing home and skilled nursing care costs being some of the highest. You don't have to deplete your savings in order to receive long-term care. At Schroman Law, we work with families to develop and implement strategic planning for medical assistance for long-term care, for assisted living, nursing home care, or home-based care. Contact us today to schedule a free consultation at schromanlaw.com. That's SCHROMEN law.com.
And we're back on the Matt McNeil Show. Brett Johnson filling in for Matt here on this Tuesday afternoon. Want to get back now to my conversation with Matt Gertz of Media Matters as we're talking about his column, The Right's Decade-Long Lurch Towards Vladimir Putin's Russia. Yeah, we can even go back to that first administration, and certainly it's happening during this administration where at least Trump's embrace of Putin is often just dismissed as being just rhetoric and he's just joking. Don't take it too seriously. But now as we see Trump's latest moves on Ukraine with how he's been treating Zelensky and threatening to withhold funding to Ukraine in terms of helping them in their war with Russia, we see the full consequences of this right-wing shift on how they approach Vladimir Putin. And I guess my question would be on this, do you think this right-wing media embrace of Russia is permanent, or is this something that could change with a future Republican presidential candidate or a future Republican leader? Or is this something that's largely going to be here to stay for at least a generation?
Well, it's always the leader that kind of makes that determination, the leader of the party. I mean, I think while there was certainly a pro-Putin faction of the right-wing media in 2014, 2015, if Donald Trump had not become the party's nominee and then become president, I think that it's unlikely that they would have knit together quite so fully. But I think since then, what we've seen is a Republican Party and a right media that increasingly, supports not only Russia, but its methods, but its system. A right-wing media that is increasingly, contemptuous of democracy, of liberal ideals. And I think that will continue to put the party closer to the Russian axis than the European one that we've traditionally allied with.
Yeah, that's kind of depressing to think about, that this largely could be here to stay within the Republican Party. We are speaking with Matt Gertz. He is a senior fellow at Media Matters, and his column, The Right's Decade-Long Lurch Toward Vladimir Putin's Russia. Again, find that over at MediaMatters.org. Final question would be, have any conservative voices at least emerged within right-wing media or even politics in general that's pushing back against this alignment within Russia, or has pretty much everyone just kind of fallen in line? I know there could be maybe some voices that are dissenting that maybe aren't being amplified that much, but what are we seeing in terms of any Republicans or conservatives pushing back on this idea that Russia is now our ally and Putin is our friend?
I would say the less influence you have within Republican Party circles, the more likely you are to be speaking out. There are certainly some critical voices that I read in National Review or in the Wall Street Journal who prefer these kind of old alignment of the Republican Party and are very critical of some of these moves that Trump is making. At the same time, that is the faction that has lost in the primaries pretty consistently and is running out of champions within the Republican Party. If you look at people like Tucker Carlson or the primetime hosts at Fox News or the variety of right-wing influencers and streamers who have large audiences, what you see is people who are falling in line behind Trump and agreeing that whatever he thinks is best. And right now that means allying with Vladimir Putin's Russia.
And we've been speaking with Matt Gertz. He is a senior fellow for Media Matters. Column is The Right's Decade-Long Lurch Toward Vladimir Putin's Russia. Really encourage you to check that out over at MediaMatters.org, as Matt does a good job breaking down the timeline of how even as far back in 2012, Republicans have evolved on their stance with Russia from being very much an anti-Russia to now being, well, completely pro-Putin and being on board with what he wants to push on the world stage. Again, find that column over at MediaMatters.org. Matt, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And going back to my close, was that a Freudian slip when I tried to mix up Russians and Republicans?
It could have been.
Very well could have been. Yeah, I think they almost are just one and the same. And just piggybacking off of what we were talking about with Matt Gertz and what they do at Media Matters, which is a great organization that follows a lot of the lies that we see from right-wing media, and to bring things full circle, going back with Social Security and Medicare. Of course, Media Matters does a great job breaking down some of the lies that we see about Social Security and Medicare, and one that we didn't even really have time to get into with Max from our conversation earlier this hour, which, by the way, you can find over at am950radio.com or the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, is the fact that Social Security is beset with fraud. In fact, there are people who are over 150 years old still claiming benefits, which, by the way, is not true. I only have a few minutes left in this hour, so I'm not going to fully break them down. But really, we're going to hear from someone like Donald Trump that says that there are transgender mice that are being funded, even though it's actually transgenic mice, not transgender mice. Can we really trust him on Social Security? By the way, if you don't know what a transgenic mice, it has nothing to do with being transgender. It's mice that have a foreign DNA inserted into their genome, and basically this helps researchers prevent things like cancer, which I think is a pretty good thing to do. So, yeah, if we have one guy who's mixing up transgender mice and transgenic mice, don't think we can really trust what they're saying on Social Security either. And like I said, we didn't have a whole lot of time to break down all of the myths that we've been hearing about Social Security from Donald Trump and Elon Musk, but there are a lot of them. And just one more point to finish with Social Security and Medicare, going back to our conversation with Max, we were talking about all of these staff cuts that are happening at the Social Security Administration. And this is really the point, because this is separate from the actual benefits that you receive from Social Security. You need someone to administer those benefits and to make sure you're eligible. Especially for those who are on disability, you have to go through a whole process to get approved to get on SSA. And let me tell you, from experience I have with friends trying to get on there, it takes forever. And if you're going to cut the staff of the SSA even further, well, you're going to have even worse service and people who are just going to throw up their hands in the air and say, well, I guess Social Security isn't working. Maybe we do need to privatize the program or turn it over to Elon Musk and let him go all Doge on it. So keep that in mind. This whole idea of cutting the staff is exactly the point, to try to get people to lose faith in Social Security. So we got to keep fighting on. Coming up in hour two, we'll join you here, at least in Minnesota, as we have some local stories to talk about with Patrick Kulikan of the Minnesota Reformer. But for everyone else, we'll see you tomorrow on the Matt McNeil Show. Thanks for listening.
Tune in this Saturday morning from 7 to 8 a.m. right here on AM 950 for the Gardening with Joy and Holly radio show from 7 to 8 a.m. We'll be discussing That's Not Totally True garden myths, as well as the world of lettuces. Our guest is canner and blogger Linda Zidrick will be with us, and we'll answer your garden questions. So tell your friends Garden Talk Radio is on AM 950 from 7 to 8 a.m. Saturday mornings.
Turn to Auto Technical with your vehicle donation. Even though Auto Technical is a small nonprofit, we have helped more families with transportation than any organization in Minnesota. Since '94, we have reconditioned donated vehicles so they have a higher tax benefit. Call Richard at 612-919-5526, 612-919-5526, or autotech.org.
Join me, Tom Hartman, where smart people get their news. The Tom Hartman Program on AM 950, KTNF, St. Louis Park, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
AP News, I'm Haya Panjwani. Ukraine has agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. At a news conference, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. will now present the offer to Russia.
We'll take this offer now to the Russians, and we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball is now in their court. And but again, the president's objective here is, number one, above everything else, he wants the war to end. And I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
The Trump administration lifted its suspension of military aid and intelligence sharing for Ukraine. The National Transportation Safety Board is recommending a ban on some helicopter flights in the area where a military chopper and a passenger jet collided near Washington, D.C.
National Transportation Safety Board Chairwoman Jennifer Hamady says many helicopters and planes are flying way too close in the area where a Black Hawk helicopter collided with a passenger jet in January, killing 67 people. Hamady says choppers and planes can get as close as 75 feet from each other.
We're therefore recommending today that the FAA permanently prohibit operations on helicopter Route 4 between Haynes Point and the Wilson Bridge when runways 15 and 33 are being used for departures and arrivals at DCA.
Hamady says from the end of October 2021 to December 2024, there's been on average one near miss per month and more than 15,000 planes getting alerts of helicopters being too close. Donna Warter, Washington.
AP correspondent Danica Kirka reports from Greenland on elections.
Trump's comments about Greenland, which is home to about 56,000 people, may speed up the island's moves towards independence. As one lawmaker I spoke with earlier this week said, "We were always for independence, but Trump has changed everything."
This is AP News.
Robinhood Gold members can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on annual retirement contributions. With Robinhood Gold, the perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive a 3% boost on annual IRA contributions, sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 a month for 1 year from first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to Robinhood.com/boost. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC.
Progressive knows there are some surprisingly expensive things in life, like fences. A house with a big yard and a white picket fence was always the dream. But then you saw the price to install a fence and you're wondering if the color is driving the price up. Nobody ever dreams of a beige or a gray picket fence, right? So maybe those fences are cheaper. But no, they're not. Then you remember that switching your home and auto to Progressive could save you hundreds and make all your dreams of a fence come true. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company affiliates and other insurers, not a...
Hi, I'm Bruce Klopfleisch, a college political science instructor and attorney. Join me every Sunday at 5 p.m. for Politics Matters. We dive into how civics, politics, and law affect you. Discover how government impacts your daily life from the federal level all the way down to your local city. Each week, I'll share my key takeaways and teaching moments on crucial civics concepts to help understand what is happening in the current political environment. That's Politics Matters with Bruce Klopfleisch, Sundays at 5 p.m. or anytime on your favorite podcast app.
This is Chad, owner of AM 950 for Snap Construction again. Does your home feel colder than it should with the furnace constantly running? Or do certain rooms always feel colder than the rest of the house? Those are signs the attic in your home may need an insulation upgrade. Snap Construction can help by providing a free energy audit for your home's insulation. The average cost of getting new insulation can cost much less than a new furnace. Plus, Snap Construction is a BPI certified installer. That means if you use Snap for your next insulation project, you qualify for up to $650 in total rebates from your energy provider. After my free inspection, my insulation upgrade was completed within a few weeks and the rebate check was in the mail. Snap to it and reduce your heating bill this winter with Snap Construction. Call 612-333-SNAP. That's 612-333-SNAP for your free energy audit when you mention AM 950. Snap Construction, arguably the most well-reviewed exterior contractor and insulation company in the metro.
With your AM 950 weather, I'm Brett Johnson. Look for sunny skies today with a high near 43, tonight cloudy with a low around 31, and Wednesday sunny with a high around 57. Experience a great atmosphere with great music at Crooners Supper Club. Explore the shows at croonersmn.com. Stop by Maggie's Lounge before or after your show for cocktails and light fare. Open Wednesdays through Sundays at 4:30. No tickets needed. Again, that's Maggie's Lounge at Crooners Supper Club.
Portions of the following program may be pre-recorded.
Hour 2 of the Matt McNeil Show on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. As you can probably tell, it is not Matt today. Brett Johnson filling in for Matt as he is off this week. You got me filling in today. Bruce Klopfleisch is in tomorrow. Philip Anthony from the Downright Upright Show will host the Thursday edition of the show. Then Friday, we are back to the one, the only, the legendary Nancy Nelson. A lot of people love having Nancy on, so you'll get to hear her again on Friday. But for today, you have me, and we still have a very busy show coming up for the rest of the way. In just a few minutes, we'll be speaking with Patrick Houlihan of the Minnesota Reformer, as we're going to be talking about some of the latest news in the state legislature. Melissa Lopez Franson throwing her hat in the ring for that U.S. Senate race. Plus, we'll also be talking about how Minnesota, I don't know if you knew this, but we have one of the highest rates of cancer in the entire country. And this is a new development as of only about 2015. We're going to talk about why that's possibly happening and even some of the geographic breakdown of how that looks, since there are many rural areas that are experiencing higher rates than others. And it's not completely an urban versus rural discussion, because there are some rural areas of Minnesota that are seeing their rates decline. So a lot to get to with Patrick Houlihan coming up in just a few minutes. We'll also be talking about the Minnesota Council of Disabilities and their forum, legislative forum, that comes your way on Friday. We'll have a guest talking with us about that coming up at about 4:35. But before we get to all of that, if you're watching on our Facebook and our YouTube feed and you look behind me, you see a logo behind you that says FYI Politics with Brett Johnson. Producer Patrick Lilia was good enough to get that logo back on the screen. And if you're not familiar, that's a show I used to host weekdays on AM 950 during the 2020 election cycle. And Patrick, you brought that logo back on the screen. Appreciate it. But as I'm looking through, I believe I took that map from one of those red-blue breakdowns in terms of which county voted for which candidate. Wondering how accurate that is. I think I took that from the 2016 election cycle. But it's interesting to see how that evolves as I'm looking at that map, because a lot of those blue rural districts, of course, are now very red, while many of these light blue districts have gone very dark blue. So, see, I'm kind of a political nerd where I could spend the entire hour just looking at this map and trying to find the voter margins compared to when I made that map versus what they are now. But appreciate you bringing that back on the screen.
Yeah, no problem. I like to give you a little surprise every time you get to sit in the host chair. Sometimes it was the music selections, which we're not going to do today, but this time I found the old logo. It was kind of a snap decision too. Maybe it was just a couple minutes before the show. I'm like, what can I surprise you with today since you're hosting? And so I pulled out that old map.
Yeah, you do a good job with that. I know the last time I hosted, which was last summer or so, I know you pulled out my old FYI Politics theme, or maybe even if we're really going to kick it old school, the Minnesota Repartee theme. Or wait, no, I have the name of that old show wrong. I think it was the Minnesota Progressive Repartee, since we wanted to play on having our initials of the show be MPR. Back when I hosted that show with Hunter Hawes and also Doug Padgett back in the day. Yeah, I think you played our old theme, Locker Room Talk.
Yeah, I did used to do that. I was thinking of that old intro. And here are your hosts today, Brett Johnson.
Oh, that's right. The old Gregory Rich used to voice that as well, depending on who was hosting that day. A lot of fun to do that back then, but that song even now seems out of date at this point. We've gone beyond locker room talk to just saying things out in the open. Now that I guess we don't have woke anymore, according to Trump and Musk, so I guess we just say that stuff out loud for reasons. But yeah, thanks for the walk down memory lane and looking at my old logo for FYI Politics with Brett Johnson.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. So, question for you, Patrick. I know you're someone who does some frequent air travel, probably more than me, but do you ever use Southwest Airlines when you travel?
I did actually use Southwest last summer when I went to Denver for my birthday. So I do have a little experience with them recently.
Well, I have some bad news for people who like flying with Southwest. They have changed their policy where, if you remember in some of their old advertisements, they would say, bags fly free. Well, guess what? That's no longer the case. You have to pay for your bags now. And at that point, I don't really know. What advantage do you get out of Southwest Airlines? I mean, I know sometimes you can find a cheaper airfare, but that was always a selling point for me when I would go flying, and I wouldn't want to spend as much money using Delta or American Airlines or anyone else. But that's kind of a bummer. I like that idea of bags fly free, and now they're getting rid of it for, again, reasons. I can't imagine that's going to help their bottom line. I mean, sure, in the short term, you add a revenue line in theory to your income statement, but how many people are going to be like me and say, I'm no longer going to fly Southwest Airlines anymore? Are you in that boat now too?
I could go either way on that. It's not something I really evaluate all that highly. I did already see one comment. I won't call him a friend, but he's just a guy who I see around online. And he said, yeah, that's pretty much going to pull the plug on me prioritizing flying with Southwest going forward. And so, I know Southwest has talked a lot about that some things that they used to do just aren't working for them anymore. And I'm obviously not in their boardroom, so I don't really know what those discussions look like, but it sounds like a lot of the decisions that they're coming to are not going to be very popular.
No, and speaking of possibly unpopular decisions, as I transition to another topic, we're going to do a quick hitter on some big Minnesota stories. I won't spend a lot of time on this since I'll use the old Matt McNeil line. We're not a sports station, but I do have to bring this up since the Minnesota Vikings are arguably the biggest sports franchise in Minnesota. They have let their quarterback, Sam Darnold, go as he has signed a new contract with the Seattle Seahawks. I'm kind of in favor of that. I was really miffed by those last two games he played, so I say Sam Darnold, wish you all the luck in Seattle. Probably one of the better landing spots he could have found, at least better than going back to the Jets or the New York Giants. But Vikings going to be moving in a different direction, probably with J.J. McCarthy, as well as another random veteran backup quarterback that'll join the team. But I know you're a big Vikings fan in there, Patrick. What are you thinking about Sam Darnold no longer being the quarterback of the team?
I said the same thing all along that I said about Kirk Cousins, is that if some team wants to give him that kind of contract, he's all theirs. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I'm not going to be annoyed. And he did definitely cost himself some money with those last two disastrous games at the end of last season that kind of might have given the Vikings a little more thought about it, because that was probably the thought was heading into those final two games, like, he's going to get so much money somewhere else. Like, it's not even going to be a thought. And then he had those two games, and that, as we said, drove his price down quite a bit and probably made the Vikings go, maybe we can actually make this work. But like I said, it's the same thing I felt about Cousins, that he's all yours. If you want to give him that kind of money, I have no regrets about not keeping him.
And to think 3 years, $100 million is one of the lower salaries you'll find for a starting quarterback in the NFL. Not the lowest by any means, but a lot of the top line quarterbacks make significantly more money than that. But he's on his way out of Minnesota. Good luck in Seattle, Sam Darnold. Nothing against you, but I was pretty concerned after seeing those last two Vikings games this year. So we'll have to see how J.J. McCarthy does taking over the reins of the team. All right, enough sports talk. Let's get into one more piece of Minnesota news. And this is something I saw in MinPost that kind of goes back to our discussion of Elon Musk and Doge and the impact that federal cuts can have on Well, not just at the very macro, well, I see it from 10,000 feet, and I guess these cuts don't really impact me. Let's talk about something hyper local and go to the city of Carver. Because if this continuing resolution goes through the Republican controlled Congress, the city of Carver could be hurt significantly. And why, may you ask? Again, found this over in MinPost, so you can check this out over at minpost.com. But the city of Carver wants to upgrade a levee that has kept the river, the Minnesota River, flooding the town for decades. And you would think that's pretty important, getting a levee built that prevents flooding. And they even had help from their congressperson, Tom Emmer, who, of course, is a Republican from the 6th District, as he asked for more than $27 million for local transportation projects in the 2025 budget, including getting that new levee built in the city of Carver. Unfortunately for Emmer and, well, Congress and, well, Minnesota as a whole, none of that funding has been included in any of these proposed Republican budgets. Now, the reason I bring that up is that Emmer was trying to get this funding through what's called an earmark, which is funny because at least the constant narrative is that it's only Democrats who want earmarks. Well, no, Republicans ask for them too for projects that are very much needed, like this levee in Carver. So when you hear talk about earmarks and automatically think it's waste, well, no, it's not. Oftentimes when you're asking for earmarks, you're trying to get projects funded that are very necessary for towns in your district and around the entire state. And I would certainly count building a levee in the city of Carver along the Minnesota River to be a very important budget item. But lo and behold, it's not going to be in any of those Republican budgets, with lots of other projects that could potentially be hurting Minnesota towns around the state. They wrote about some other projects over at minpost.com. So encourage you to check that out, because when you hear the word earmarks, you automatically probably think that's a dirty word, but not necessarily. All right, let's go ahead and get to our interview with Patrick Houlihan of the Minnesota Reformer. We have a lot to talk about today, including, as I mentioned, Melissa Lopez Franson throwing her hat in the ring for that U.S. Senate seat in Minnesota for 2026. Also talk about some news from the state legislature and lots more. So let's go ahead and get to that now. Patrick Houlihan of the Minnesota Reformer. AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Brett Johnson with you here on a Tuesday afternoon, filling in for Matt McNeil. And even though I am filling in, doesn't mean we still can't stray away from our usual routines. And on Tuesdays, we usually speak with Patrick Houlihan, who is the editor-in-chief of the Minnesota Reformer. Make sure you go to minnesotareformer.com for the best in Minnesota news and politics, as we'll be chatting about some of the news stories that they have been working on over the past week or so. And the stories we're going to be chatting about today include how Keith Ellison has joined 19 other attorneys general filing a lawsuit against the Trump administration over the firing of federal workers. We'll also be talking about how some parts of Minnesota's farm country have higher cancer rates, but the causes aren't necessarily clear on why that's happening. Plus, this bill that just passed the Minnesota House of Representatives, which expands whistleblower protections in light of what we've seen from the Feeding Our Future scandal and others. So lots to get to today. Patrick, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So let's start off talking about this lawsuit that Keith Ellison joined along with 19 other attorney generals, because this lawsuit was filed against the Trump administration over its mass layoffs of federal probationary employees. Lawsuit argues that these firings, which impacted tens of thousands of workers across multiple agencies, including many here in the state of Minnesota, violated federal rules governing large-scale reductions in the workforce. So what have been some of the key legal arguments behind what Attorney General Ellison and others are saying in this lawsuit, and what are they thinking makes these mass layoffs potentially unlawful?
Well, as Ellison said, that there are laws governing these large-scale reductions in the federal government's workforce that the administration has to abide by, and that these firings have done a lot of harm, not just to the workers, but to the state of Minnesota, which is what Ellison argues gives them standing to sue.
And how have these terminations affected federal employees in Minnesota? Do we have an estimate of how many have been impacted, and at least what the economic ripple effects might be that they have on the state from their potential firings? Because this is a lot of workers, and as I mentioned, these are probationary workers that for the most part had stellar reviews from their their supervisors and no disciplinary issues. So they largely are being fired, it seems, without cause. But do we know what kind of impact they could have, at least economically, here in Minnesota, and how many of these workers have potentially been terminated thus far in our state?
Yeah, there's one analysis firm that tallied up more than 60,000 government workers fired from 17 different agencies. That's obviously changing every day. In the state of Minnesota, we have 18,000 federal workers. So that would not necessarily cause a Minnesota to go into a economic decline, but overall, nationwide, those job losses would certainly lead to ripple effects. But more importantly, are that you are hurting the federal government's ability to both prepare and respond to major events. I think that's something that's not being considered enough right now. So much of what the federal government does is to get ready for huge kind of black swan events, whether it's a natural disaster, a war, terrorist attack, and then also responding and helping people once that happens. The federal government is really the only institution that can do that work because of such scale and expense. And so I think that what we're underestimating is our ability to both prepare and respond to that kind of event. And we know these events happen all the time, whether it's the LA fires or the terrorist attacks of 9/11. These kinds of things happen to every president. And I don't think the Trump administration is really appreciating the degree to which they could be blindsided and shorthanded once one of these events happens. And we know they're going to happen because they happen in every presidency. They often define every presidency.
Couldn't agree with you more, because even if you look at the history of how we've responded to natural disasters or terrorist attacks or anything like that, you can't just turn these things over to the states and say, well, the states will handle it. The whole reason why we have the federal government handling these types of situations is because the states weren't able to get a hold on trying to help people out when we have these types of disasters. So yeah, I think you're right that they're definitely not appreciating exactly what the federal government does, or maybe they do appreciate what the federal government does, or just simply don't care because of their, well, at least in the case of Elon Musk, his libertarian ideology. Want to move on now to another piece that Christopher Ingram worked, which talks about how some parts of Minnesota's farm country have high cancer rates, but the causes aren't clear necessarily as to why that's happening. Because I didn't know this, but Minnesota has one of the highest cancer rates in the country, with significant geographic differences with metro versus rural. Now, while lifestyle factors like smoking and diet play a major role, of course, in cancer diagnoses, researchers are also investigating the potential impact of environmental exposures, including agricultural chemicals, which could maybe be a reason why we are seeing higher cancer rates in our rural areas. So Minnesota's cancer rates have diverged from national trends in recent years. And this is an important thing to point out, because as of even as soon as 2015, Minnesota's cancer rate pretty much matched what the national trends were, but that's changed over the past decade or so. At least, what are some of the leading theories behind why the state has remained at least higher than the national average when it comes to our rates of cancer in the state of Minnesota?
Yeah, as you said, we were at the national average not that long ago. Then all of a sudden we had one of the highest rates in the country. So, we have a strong healthcare system, and it could be that we are better at cancer screening and detection. And the rate of uninsured did drop significantly after 2010, when Obamacare was passed and Minnesota expanded Medicaid. So that there's, and certainly cancer screening and detection has improved. So that could be it. That would be a benign reason. But we also have other possible explanations. that are less benign, and you mentioned the significant disparities in geographically, where we have some western counties in particular where the rate seems to have increased pretty significantly. And there's lots of studies around the causes, and some of that, as you mentioned, I mean, lifestyle is generally considered the biggest driver, whether you smoke and diet and exercise and so forth. But I think there's an emerging interest in the use of farm chemicals and the impact that could have on cancer rates. At this point, I think it's we aren't necessarily certain. It's very hard to tease out causality, but there's certainly some indications that exposure to pesticides and the fertilizer, water pollution, and so forth could be bad for our health. So I think we need to see more research. And of course, the question is, will the government be willing to fund that research, especially in this current environment?
Yeah, that, of course, is the important question. How are we going to get that research funded when we see what's happening at the federal level with Doge and what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing? Because this isn't so cut and dry saying, well, if you just look at rural areas of Minnesota, they have higher cancer rates and the metro area has lower cancer rates, because it does get a little more complicated than that. When we look at cancer rates in several ag-intensive western Minnesota counties, they have relatively low cancer rates and have actually been decreasing for the past decade or so. Do we know why that's been happening? Why some areas of these very ag-intensive areas of Minnesota are seeing their rates decrease? Or is this, again, something that we need more research on? Because I found that interesting that we can't just draw the nice, neat conclusion that rural areas are seeing higher cancer rates and metro areas are seeing lower rates.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, again, is where we need more study, and that means we need to fund more research to discover why that might be the case. Because at this point, Chris seems to think that we can trace these correlations between environmental exposures and cancer development, but establishing that causality is much harder. And so I think that we need to fund a lot more research into this so that we can understand how Minnesota in particular went from the middle of the pack in cancer rates to one of the highest in the nation.
Yeah, because a lot of people wouldn't think of that when we look at Minnesota's excellent healthcare system, that you wouldn't think we would have those higher cancer rates. But you can read more about that, as well as some of the correlations that Christopher brought up, over at minnesotareformer.com. Title of the article is "Some Parts of Minnesota's Farm Country Have Higher Cancer Rates, but the Causes Aren't Clear." Let's go back and now talk about what's happening in the Minnesota legislature, because the Minnesota House recently passed a bill aimed at strengthening whistleblower protections for state employees who report fraud, waste, or abuse of public funds. Now, that was a bipartisan measure that was passed unanimously in the Minnesota House. Don't see that happen very often. And what they passed seeks to encourage state workers to come forward without fear or retaliation. Meanwhile, another anti-fraud bill that would have required updates on legislative audit recommendations failed to pass after unanimous opposition from House Democrats. So, as I understand it, Minnesota already has an extensive whistleblower protection law. So I'm curious, what exactly does this bill that was recently passed by the Minnesota House do to strengthen our whistleblower protection laws even further for state workers?
Well, it expands the folks who can be protected to include all state employees and not just unclassified workers. So this would include managers. That seems like a somewhat significant difference. But mostly Republicans, they have this one vote advantage in the House, 67-66. They therefore get to control the docket. So they can decide what's going to come up before the House on the House floor. That will all change likely today when there's a special election in District 40B, which is a North Metro district that's heavily Democratic. they have a special election there. They're likely to elect a Democrat and will be at 67. And from here on out, everything will need to be negotiated. But for now, Republicans are able to bring bills up to the floor. They have an interest in highlighting the recent spate of fraud in Minnesota government programs because obviously it embarrasses the DFL legislature as well as DFL Governor Tim Walz. So there's a certain amount of showmanship here. I mean, I don't doubt that they really want to cut back on government fraud, as we all do. But I think there is a little bit of politics here, in addition to pursuing their policy agenda. But that's the legislature, and they're entitled to do it, especially now that, especially in the case of so much money having been stolen from Minnesota taxpayers in the last 10 years or so.
Now let's talk about this other anti-fraud bill that House Republicans were proposing but ended up not passing due to universal opposition from House DFLers. Why did House Democrats oppose this bill that would require updates from the Office of the Legislative Auditor? I know it'll probably require some details and maybe getting into the weeds, but what were their main arguments against this bill, and why were they concerned about what this would potentially do?
Well, they said it's unnecessary, and it was going to cost $500,000 for the Office of Legislative Auditor and the state agencies to comply. I suspect that the undercurrent here is that very often the agencies it's never fun to get audited by the Office of Legislative Auditor, and I think they often disagree with the recommendations made by the auditor. They find them to be unwieldy, maybe duplicative, and just adding to the many bureaucratic hurdles to do their business, to get their work done. And so I suspect there may have been some lobbying on the part of the agencies saying, look, we don't really want to have to go through this again. But there certainly seems like a common sense case to be made for having the auditor, because they do these audits. At the back of the audit, there's always a list of recommendations. It does seem like it'd be a good idea to know, like, have they taken these recommendations up or not? But I suspect that the agencies feel like it's just another chance to attack the agencies.
You can read more about these whistleblower bills that were in the House of Representatives over at MinnesotaReformer.com. Michelle Griffith wrote about this, titled Minnesota House Passes Bill Expanding Whistleblower Protections for State Workers Reporting Fraud. All right, one more topic to talk about, and that's at least on the topic of politics. You kind of alluded to the fact that special election is happening today in a Minnesota House. That's that Roseville district where originally the DFLers had a candidate running who didn't live in that district. And as you kind of said, it'd be highly unusual for Republicans to win that seat. Democrats are heavy favorites. You could feel free to comment on that. But my other question had to do with Melissa Lopez Franson now entering that race for U.S. Senate. What exactly do you make of her campaign so far, since it appears to be kind of taking on that populist tone, as you guys write about, talking about how in her press release she wrote that our rights are being stripped away while unelected billionaires slash services for everyday Americans. So at least on the in the political realm, what are you thinking about Melissa Lopez Franson running for that U.S. Senate race?
Well, the more the merrier. But I really think that she's got a steep hill to climb here, purely because of name recognition. I think sometimes legislators, because they are recognized in their at the Capitol, they think that the wider public knows who they are, and I think her name recognition statewide is probably 1%, and name recognition is a really big deal in primaries and in any election. And so there's only a couple ways to get there. One is if you're an incredibly dynamic campaigner who draws a lot of what we call earned media, or basically press attention. Or you go out and you raise a lot of money, you're a good fundraiser, you raise a lot of money, and then you essentially buy name recognition with ad campaigns. So that's what that's her challenge over the next 16 months or so before the August primary, unless she decides just to go to the convention. And there is certainly a convention strategy where you would you play that inside game and you win delegates and you win a DFL convention endorsement. I think that's going to be tough to do with Peggy Flanagan in the race, who I think would probably have a good shot at an endorsement, and certainly blocking anyone else from getting an endorsement. So I think it's going to be a challenge, but we've seen stranger things.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about how when you oftentimes get members of the legislature running for statewide offices, they may overestimate their name recognition, since, well, at least among people who follow and cover what's happening at the Capitol, yeah, you see your name out there a lot in media, but the broader general public, for the most part, doesn't usually know who those House representatives and state senators are. So I think you probably hit the nail on the head that she will have a steep hill to climb to try to build that name recognition. Well, you can read more about what Patrick and the other great writers at the Minnesota Reformer have been covering over at minnesotareformer.com. Again, make sure you go to minnesotareformer.com. Patrick, as always, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Always a pleasure.
All right, let's take a break. And a reminder, later on, we'll be joined by David Fenley. He's the Minnesota Council of Disabilities ADA Director, as they have a legislative forum coming up this Friday, as we'll talk about what they're looking for from the Minnesota State Legislature, plus how DOGE and the feds have been impacting disabled people. So stay with us.
I heard them calling in the distance.
Everyone knows I love Rudy Luther Toyota, but do you know who else loves Toyotas? Consumer Reports. They're out with their best of 2025 auto issue, and once again, it reads Toyota, Toyota, Toyota. Of the new 2025 models, Consumer Reports recommends the Prius, Corolla, Corolla Hybrid, the Camry, the Sienna, the Corolla Cross Hybrid, the RAV4, the RAV4 Hybrid, the Highlander, and the Highlander Hybrid. In almost every class, you'll find a Toyota. Find one for yourself at Rudy Luther Toyota, the southeast corner of 394 and 169 in Golden Valley.
Greg Bakken here. I've told you about the out-of-the-world roast beef sandwiches at Maverick's Real Roast Beef, but I haven't told you about their Philly steak sandwiches, turkey bacon avocado sandwich, BLT, crispy chicken, fish sandwiches, brisket, or pulled pork. Okay, you get the idea. They make a lot of delicious food to the same standard as their famous roast beef sandwiches, and now I'm starving. I'm going to go to Maverick's Real Roast Beef off Lexington and Roseville, and you need to go too. Check out their menu at mavericksbeef.com.
Hey everyone, this is longtime AM 950 host Ellie Krug. I'm thrilled to announce my brand new show, The Illegal Trans Woman, which takes advocacy from my community, transgender and gender variant people, up several big notches. The Illegal Trans Woman will feature interviews, commentary, and information aimed at pushing back against efforts to oppress trans and gender variant humans. Please tune in on Saturdays at 4 or wherever you go to get your podcasts. And do me a favor, share about the show. Thanks.
End-of-life decisions are not easy to make. Hi, I'm Mary T. of Mary T. Hospice Care. It's important to make sure that this difficult time is meaningful and comforting to you and your loved ones. Our hospice team provides an individualized program of physical, emotional, spiritual, and practical care so your loved one is comfortable and not in pain. At Mary T. Hospice, we understand that choosing the right hospice care provider can be overwhelming, but we're here to assist you. Learn more today at marytinc.com.
Hi, I'm Peter Solak.
And I'm Adam Ostrowski.
We are here at Woodland Stoves and Fireplaces to talk about the joy of live fire cooking. Cooking over a live fire is the oldest and most basic form of cooking.
What's new is in the way fire is handled and its heat is managed.
It's easier to experience and enjoy the smell and taste of food cooked over a live fire.
Woodland Stoves and Fireplaces sells and installs live fire grills, fire pits, and ovens. Let us help you experience the smell, the taste, the fun of cooking with fire.
Pizza was first made and is still best made in an open fire oven. The radiant and conductive heat of a live fire is unmatched for wood roasting and baking artisan breads too.
Come see the many ways you can cook with a live fire.
Woodland Stoves and Fireplaces has over 35 working wood and gas units on display at the corner of East Franklin and Riverside Avenue in Minneapolis. More information at woodlandstoves.com. Find the fire that works for you. Woodland Stoves and Fireplaces, out of the ordinary products and services since 1977.
Turn to Auto Technical with your vehicle donation. We have families waiting for a car. You know, over 85% of unemployed are successful in finding and keeping a job if they have dependable transportation. A car plus a job equals a life changed. 612-919-5526. We have families waiting for a car. 919-5526 or autotech.org.
With a look at your AM 950 weather, I'm Patrick Lilia. Tonight, cloudy with a low of 31. Then on Wednesday, sunshine with a high of 57. Music is still the hottest at Crooner's Supper Club in Fridley. Crooner's is located just north of I-694 off Highway 65 and Moore Lake Drive. View their upcoming music schedules and food menus at croonersloungemn.com.
AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Brett Johnson filling in for Matt McNeil today. And to close off the show, we're going to be talking about something that's coming up on Friday, an event that you'll want to pay attention to because a lot of people in the state of Minnesota and just around the country have disabilities, and more people than you probably imagine. And Minnesota has a really cool program that helps advocate for people with disabilities. It's called the Minnesota Council for Disabilities, and they have a legislative event coming up this Friday that will talk about what they want to highlight here in this upcoming legislative session and what they would like to see passed, and overall how we can help people with disabilities around the state of Minnesota, which is more needed than ever after what we've been seeing from the federal government side from Elon Musk and Donald Trump. But joining us to talk about the upcoming legislative event is David Fenley. He is the Minnesota Council of Disabilities ADA Director, as we're going to be talking about what folks can expect this Friday. David, thanks so much for coming back on the show today.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So before we dive into that event and that legislative forum coming up this Friday, first up, for people who aren't familiar, can you tell us a little bit about the Minnesota Council for Disabilities and what exactly you guys do and advocate for the disabled community here in Minnesota?
I will. And I'm glad you started out with the fact that folks with disabilities are, I think, a larger portion of the population than a lot of folks understand. You're looking at about 27% of the population. So we're a pretty large minority group. Obviously, that spans all the different disabilities that exist out there, from, neurodivergence to wheelchair use to deaf and blind, or some things you might not consider a disability, things like depression, anxiety. There's a lot of things. Anything that affects your life in one way or another is considered a disability by the ADA. So thank you for hitting on that. Yeah, so we are the Minnesota Council on Disability. We've been around for about 50 years now. We have a statutory obligation to inform basically the whole state about all things that pertain to disability. So we'll inform the legislature. That's what this is about. Our policy work, but we also answer questions, general public. I talk to cities, counties, I talk to businesses. We really go around the state to make sure that folks with disabilities rights are supported, but also we like to focus on that culture shift. So we like to change minds, let people know what folks with disabilities do. But we are a state agency, a standalone state agency, governed by 17 council members who are appointed by the governor. And they essentially tell us the general direction that we go in as an agency. Like, do we support this policy? Are we going to jump on this initiative? Are we going to do this particular thing to make sure that folks with disabilities' lives are improved, or at least stay at a base level, which is kind of where we're at right now with things going on both state and federally. It's like, let's just hold on to the rights we have.
Yeah, unfortunately, that kind of is the case right now with the attacks we've been seeing, at least from the federal government. And something I wanted to just go back to and highlight is the fact that I found this really cool that this is created as a state agency, which, by the way, is another good reason to live in the state of Minnesota. Is this something that's unique to our state, or do other states around the country have this? I'm not sure if you have that information, but I just find that kind of a cool aspect that we have this idea here in Minnesota that we have a council for people with disabilities and a group that's actually out, that's government sponsored, that is out advocating for the community.
That's a really good question. And yeah, we are unique to the country. Surely, somebody will hear this and say, hey, wait, but in this state, we have something similar. And that might be the case. I don't know everything about every single state as it pertains to disability, but the way that we're structured is very unique. We're cross disability. So we don't focus on any specific disability. It's all folks with disabilities. A lot of other, both in Minnesota and other states, a lot of their entities focus on specific groups, whether it's mental health or whether it's like developmentally disabled folks or autistic folks. But we cross disability and we have some autonomy, which I think is important because we don't serve the bureaucracy. We are part of the bureaucracy, the Minnesota state bureaucracy, but it's very clear in our founding statute that we're there to make sure folks with disabilities' rights are protected. It's very clear.
So let's talk about this legislative forum coming up on Friday. Again, that's going to be from 10 until 4 o'clock at the Minnesota Department of Revenue in St. Paul. Talk about what's going to happen at this forum and what folks can expect if they decide to attend either in person or virtually. As I understand, that's an option too for people who might have trouble physically getting down to the Capitol area.
Yep. Accessibility, if there's anything if there's any bell we ring every day, it's accessibility. And being able to join virtually or in person is very important. Because, not everybody, can easily get out of their home. So we want to make sure that folks have the options to attend in person or not. It seems like a long day. It tends to go fast. People tend to pop in and pop out with subject areas they want. But the general idea of it is really to connect folks with disabilities with legislators. So I think we have about 6 or 7 confirmed. There's always legislators who pop in at the last minute, which is fine. We totally understand schedules are demanding when it comes to folks at the legislature. We do have representation from both parties. We are an apolitical organization, but it's important for us to be able to do our work no matter who is in power or if power is shared, which is happening right now. So the way that we do connect folks with legislators, we have a couple different panel discussions. One of which I'm being the facilitator for, which surrounds accessible on-demand transportation. Now, on-demand is very unique because we have a lot of accessible transportation in the cities and around Minnesota, but you can't order it like you could a taxi. It's not, I want to go here, I want to be there now. Uber and Lyft don't do it. So that's the one that I'm talking about with Senator Dibble and then one of our constituents. But we like to talk about other stuff, things like personal care attendants. These are folks that assist people with disabilities whatever they may need. We have a vast shortage of them, so we talk a lot about that stuff as well. And we're really just making sure that legislators know what folks with disabilities want. What are our values? Where are we at in the state? What policies do we support? What policies do we not support? Because some of our work is to make sure that legislators aren't doing things that are bad for folks with disabilities.
And going back to what you were talking about with how important transportation and accessibility is, because I'm glad you brought that up, because obviously metro mobility is certainly an option for folks to take, but that's not always a realistic option, whether if you have a ride that's running late or if you need to get somewhere in a hurry. Yeah, you have to use those ride sharing services, and a lot of those vehicles are not accessible whatsoever. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I have friends that are disabled that use those types of services, and it can be almost a chore to plan just something as simple as a doctor's visit. That can end up being an all-day ordeal, not just to something as simple as, all right, I'll just dial up an Uber and I'm there in 15 minutes. It can be very, very complicated. So I'm curious what you guys are looking to have expanded, at least in terms of transportation and accessibility.
My pleasure. And Metro Mobility is a great service, but one missed ride is one missed ride. That's one, someone who's late for work, someone who got left out in the cold. So we have to acknowledge, obviously, those numbers are people who are who are trying to get places, but it is in general a good service. But in the Twin Cities, I'm guessing this is just broadcast in the Twin Cities, so I will speak to the Twin Cities crowd here. We don't have citywide on-demand accessible transportation. There are a few accessible taxis, I think like 4 or 5 in Minneapolis, but that doesn't mean that they're always on or they're always working. And TNCs or Uber and Lyft, I guess is what you call them, they do have an option in their apps to be transferred to a third party that is not Uber and Lyft drivers, a third party that then can maybe provide you an accessible ride. We'll see what happens with that. So there is no on demand. You have to plan your life 2 or 3 days out in advance if you want to do things. And you know what? I like to decide to go to the bar tonight. Maybe I want to go to church on Sunday, whatever it may be. Folks with disabilities deserve the right to do all the same things that everybody else does. And it's really too bad that, that sort of, I call like a keystone in our lives is transportation. And you can't get to the job. You can't get to the party. You can't get to church. You can't get to your family's house if you don't have transportation. You can't live where you want to live if you don't know you're going to be able to get from your house to your job or wherever it may be. So transportation really is a key when it comes to everybody's lives, not just folks with disabilities.
And of course, you can learn about transportation and a whole lot more at that legislative forum coming up this Friday from 10 until 4 o'clock at the Minnesota Department of Revenue. What other types of activities or programming are going to take place at the event, or what can folks expect if they decide to attend?
Yeah, so we have a couple discussions. We also have advocates and professionals who share stories. This is just my life. Part of, I think, a big part of what we do, I mentioned it before, the cultural side of things, it really is just showing the world that we are normal people. I'm throwing quotes up. We are your everyday person. You might see our disability, you might not. I have a disability. You can't see it. It's neurodivergency, but I'm in the world interacting with people every single day. So part of sharing those stories and showing what people's lives are like across the board in Minnesota is a big one. We also will have some pre-recorded what do you call them? Like odes to people who have been important and who have lost this year. Folks with disabilities who have done great things and then passed away. So we want to acknowledge our heroes, our advocates, but also really try to change the way that politicians think about disability. There really is this kind of weird and unfortunate notion that folks with disabilities are broken, or we're not fully human, or we're worth less because we can't produce in our economy. Well, are humans boiled down to what they can produce in our economy? Is that really the world we want to live in? I would say no, and I would say most people would agree with that statement. So we want to shift that paradigm. That's really what we want to do.
And final few questions for you, as unfortunately time does fly as we are getting towards the end of the hour. But where can listeners at least find more information about this legislative forum, such as the location or how they want to attend if they can't make it there physically? How can they attend virtually? And I guess also what people can do if they want to support the work that you guys do at the Minnesota Council of Disabilities.
Yeah, I would say so. We have a website. It's a fairly easy address, just disability.state.mn.us. We have an 800 number. You can call 800-945-8913. Visiting our website is the best thing to do to find out more about the forum and how to show up if you want, because you're more than welcome to come in person. You can ask questions to legislators. We will have some there. So that's really the best way to get in contact with us for this particular event and for other events too. If you have questions about accessibility, if you have questions about disability rights, call us, email us. It's our job. I get paid to answer those questions. We have about 11 staff. We're not a big agency. We're very small, actually. Not a lot of money being pumped into what we do, but it is important. Your last question about really how can listeners support the work that MCD does, and I really would just build on my previous comment about how folks with disabilities are viewed by society as broken. And we need fixing. We're not broken. We don't need fixing. We don't want your pity. We're not here to inspire you. without a doubt, whenever I'm hanging out with a friend, and I'll just use two examples. One is blind and one uses a wheelchair. Without a doubt, when I'm hanging out with them, we go to a restaurant and someone wants to ask a question to my friend, they ask me, oh, does your friend, I'm like, ask them, they're sitting right there. I'm not their caretaker. They're a human. Don't look at, and that's just natural. That's just, I wouldn't say natural, it's socialized that people do. But really start taking account for how you treat and view and look at folks with disabilities. We are normal. We're 27% of the population. Every single person on this planet will have a disability at some point in their lives. You're not immortal. When you figure it out, I'll take that comment back.
Exactly. No, couldn't have said it better myself. Hey, we have been speaking with David Fenley of the Minnesota Council of Disabilities. Again, they have their legislative forum coming up this Friday from 10 until 4 o'clock at the Minnesota Department of Revenue. You can also learn more about the great work they do at disability.state.mn.us, disability.state.mn.us, or if you just Google Minnesota Council on Disabilities, you'll be able to find it that way as well. But make sure you check out that forum because, as you said, more people are impacted than you probably think. I thought that statistic was only 1 in 5, but yeah, 27% still doesn't surprise me whatsoever. So make sure you check out that forum again coming up on Friday. David, really appreciate the time today. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Hey, we're going to take a break and come on back and close the show. Up next is you're listening to the Matt McNeil Show with Brett Johnson filling in here on this Tuesday afternoon.
It's time to experience the amazing flavors of eatlocalminnesota.com. It's your key to unlocking the best local and independently owned restaurants in the Twin Cities.
Nightingale off 26th and Lindale is where good times and great flavors unite. Chef Carrie keeps it fresh with seasonal dishes, or savor classics like the Nightingale Burger, steak tartare, and irresistible chocolate pot de crème. Explore tasty vegetarian, vegan, and gluten-free options, and enjoy craft cocktails, curated wines, and half-price wine bottles every Monday. Open daily 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. More at nightingalempls.com. Maverick's Real Roast Beef in Roseville sets the bar when it comes to roast beef sandwiches. But let's not forget their other mouthwatering offerings. From Philly steak to turkey bacon avocado, BLT, crispy chicken, fish, brisket, and pulled pork, the menu is a flavor-packed delight. Don't miss out on their delicious variety. Explore the full menu at mavericksbeef.com. Your taste buds will thank you.
Hey, it's Tom. Minnesotans take pride in protecting their lakes, trees, and natural beauty. And now you have a chance to do even more. The state is committed to 100% renewable energy by 2040. And by switching to all energy solar, you can help make that goal a reality. Solar works in Minnesota year-round. It runs on sunlight, not heat. So even in the winter, you're generating clean energy. And for over 15 years, All Energy Solar has been helping Minnesotans make the move to affordable, renewable power. Now is the time to act. Some federal rebates could disappear with changes in the federal. Don't wait and miss out. Get with a trusted, award-winning company. All Energy Solar was named Minnesota's best gold winner in 2024 and recognized as a top solar contractor by Solar Power World. The future is renewable. The choice is yours. Stop paying the utility company and start producing your own clean energy with All Energy Solar. Get a free consultation today at allenergysolar.com.
Back on the final segment of the Matt McNeil Show. Brett Johnson filling in for Matt today. Want to highlight a couple other pieces of news before we wrap things up. Oh boy, and these really aren't good pieces of news. Tuberculosis, that is now resurgent, according to the New York Times, in Africa. And a big reason why that could potentially get worse is that, of course, we cut U.S. aid, and many of the programs that went to some nations experiencing this uptick in terms of trying to prevent it. Yeah, our funding has been cut. So, yeah, that's not exactly good news. Also, do you remember hearing about that hack of Twitter/X yesterday? I at least don't like calling it X. Twitter sounds better, and X makes it sound like some sort of website that you're not supposed to visit. At least back as a kid that you weren't supposed to visit. But yeah, they had a cyber attack, of course, yesterday, and apparently this cyber attack hit insecure servers at Elon Musk's X office. So the guy we've put in charge of, getting unfettered access to, let's say, the Social Security Administration, the Treasury for that matter, can't even keep secure servers for his own social media company. That ought to make us feel really good. All right, but I do have some good news to close the show, though. Matt McNeil is celebrating his 15th anniversary on the airwaves here at AM 950, and I don't have details to pass along quite yet, but you do want to make sure you keep it tuned here to AM 950, as we are going to have a celebration planned at some point in the future. Matt McNeil's 15 years on the airwaves. Make sure you keep it tuned to AM 950 Radio, or also follow us on social media or our website. We should have some information on the way about this big celebration we'll have about Matt's 15th anniversary, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Bruce Klopfleisch will be filling in for Matt tomorrow. Then we got Philip Anthony on Thursday, Nancy Nelson back on Friday. But for now, Native Roots Radio is up next. We'll talk to you later.
I love my Toyotas from Rudy Luther Toyota for